Okay, so I'm going to show you how to shape some cups. I drew out my designs here. It's just some quick sketches, kind of a fancy bottom. This is more of an egg shape. I'll actually make this foot ring separately and then attach it later. And then this wider at the bottom, getting slight, that gradual curve. And then I put a handle on this one and this one in the drawing. This one will probably just kind of get a regular handle. We'll see after I get the shape done. But this is the shape that I'm working towards, right? So I've sketched my cup ideas out beforehand. I've also gotten all three balls of clay ready so that I'm not having to take the time in between each one to get clay ready. I've already got that ready and I can set that aside. These are going to be some bigger mugs, so I'm using 1.5 pounds. Normally use about 1.25 pounds, maybe a little less, depending on the mug. But that's going to be the start for this. So to get some of my shape, I also do things like create special ribs. And one of the ways you can do this is by taking like old gift cards and stuff and cutting them up. So I've got that one that's gonna have the curve to it. I've got this that I kind of have that curve built in. I use this one when I do things like planters, flower pots and stuff. It's just got some cool edges and stuff on it that I can play around with and really kind of refine the shape that I'm making. Probably should have gotten them out before I started filming, but that's okay. Okay, so got my clay in here. I'm gonna center my clay, throw my cylinder. Okay, so I'm centered. I'm gonna make my entry hole, start my cylinder. Now these, I want to be able to trim a little bit more off the bottom than my just cylinder, so I'm gonna not make my entry hole quite as deep. I'm still gonna make sure I compress the bottom. Okay, then I'm going to slow it down. Start my pulls. I use my fingertips basically when I pull, but I also have the sponge there. And that's just to make sure my fingers tend to dry out on the clay pretty quickly. So I use the sponge just to kind of keep moisture on the clay. To get my final thickness of the clay before I start shaping, I will pull with just my fingertips so that I can have a better feel for how thick the clay is. Okay, so now I've got my cylinder done. Just gonna color in the top a little bit. And now I can start shaping. So I'm gonna clean some of that off the bottom edge, because that's really where I'm gonna do my initial push with this special rib that I've got. Helps to use the correct side of it. You'll see the top gets a little wobbly. It's because I'm narrowing the bottom on it a little bit. So once I have the bottom, I have that indent set, I'm going to start shaping the rest of it. I'm going to start using this rib that I created to get to a certain point. And then I can start using the metal rib that's in our toolkit. Should probably clean this off first so I have a nice clean edge. I'm going to set this on the bottom. And I'm just going to kind of bend it in my hand and hope not to get it caught in the clay like I did, so that I can get that curve on the bottom that I want. Dry my hands a little bit. So I have that curve on the bottom that I want now. And now, this already naturally has that curve in it, just from my hands. I'm just gonna put, I want it to be a little bit more subtle than it is. So I'm gonna use this metal rib again. I could use that curved wooden rib also, but I like the flexibility of this metal one. And then there's, so I've got this bottom shape, and then I have this curve, so it's more of a, it's kind of an elegant shape to it. Now, I'm gonna clean out the inside, get all my water and stuff out of there. Be ever so careful that I don't mess up my shape. So the inside of my cup should mirror the shape of the outside, and it does pretty well because I got my cylinder to a decent thickness before I started shaping it. Now there's two things I can do with the rim. I can completely round it, in which case you can take a paper towel. I have it's like a chamois that's cut up, and I wet it and hold it over the edge. That'll give me a nice rounded edge. Okay. The other thing you can do is you can create more of an angled edge. And that angled edge create a little bit thinner drinking area, and you'll create a little bit of a ridge inside that will stop the liquid once it starts getting turned back up. Right. It's still a little rounded at the top, but it's not quite as thick. It's going to be a little bit smoother to drink out of. Let's clean up that outside where my finger was. Clean up my edge. And then I've got that first one, that first more elegant shape done. And I will turn this upside down to trim the bottom so that that foot is a little bit cleaner. Run my wire under it so it'll come off the bat later. So you can see I've got that bottom with that curve. I probably wanted a little bit more of a curve, but that's okay. I can trim a little bit and shape it because there is a little bit more clay down there than there is up here. So I'll set that one to the side. Grab another bat, one of my other balls of clay. And now I'm gonna do that egg shape. So with the egg shape, I wanna get a nice cylinder and then I'm gonna widen out the bottom. I'm not gonna use a rib or anything to shape the bottom. Okay. Make my entry hole, same way I would with anything else. And this I don't need to leave as much at the bottom because I'm going to add that secondary bottom to it. So it can be a little bit thinner at the bottom than like my last cup was. Got to open up the inside. Press my bottom so that's good and dense and doesn't crack. Now I'm going to start my pulls, slowing my wheel down. Making my cylinder. With this, like most cylinders, I try to make it a little bit narrower at the top than it is at the bottom. Especially to start with. Okay. This last pull I'll just do with my fingertips. I have a good idea of what my thickness is. Leaving a little extra at the top in case I need to trim it off. Okay, so I'm going to collar the top in. A little piece of dry clay in there. Doesn't really affect it because it was such a small piece. Okay, so now I'm going to do that egg shape. When I do the egg shape, I'm going to use the straight edge of my rib first. And I want to cut away some of that stuff on the bottom so that when as I start pulling it out, I don't have as much clay down there that I have to cut off later. I'm just going to go in and cut some of that out. Now, I'm going to use my rib to guide my shape. Okay? So I need to be careful because my hands are pretty wide, so I naturally widen out the top, not on purpose. It just sort of happens. So I'm going to start pushing from the outside. Pushing from the inside and catching with my rib. And what I'm doing is I'm choosing a spot down at the bottom where it needs to start curving back. So that's the point where I start to turn the rib. It probably needs to be a little bit lower. There we go. So now that I have kind of the bottom shape, now I'm going to work on getting that nice even line up to the top. And collar it in just a little bit. So when I'm collaring in, I want to make sure I've got hands on both sides. You'll see me sometimes just use a finger on this side, and that's really to make sure that it stays kind of circular. And then I ease the pressure off. This is a little bit bigger than I want it to be, so I'm actually going to cut the top down. So I'm going to take my needle tool. I'm just going to cut about a ½ inch, a little less off the top. Wait till my needle tool goes all the way through, and I can just lift up. And just use my wet fingers to clean up the top. Then I'll use my metal rib again to clean up the outside. Okay, and now I have that nice egg shape, and I'll clean up the top. I'm going to leave this one rounded at the top. Because it kind of fits with the whole form of the mug. I'll just come back and clean up where my fingers were. And now I need to get the water out of the inside and clean off the bat. So I just use my index finger and my middle finger, trying to keep my fingers off my rim. I probably should have done this before I rounded the rim off. The other thing you can do is get a sponge on a stick, which is literally what it sounds like. It's a sponge on the end of the stick, and you can use that to clean up some of the water on the inside. Okay, and then my modeling tool, I'm going to come in and just cut a little bit into the bottom and then use my wire to cut it off. So that's how I widen it when I need to. Okay, again, I used my rib on the outside to kind of guide it as I came up. So that I could really get the shape that I had drawn out from the beginning. And now I can do the last shape, which is that. I call it a pounder. where it's wider at the bottom and it kind of has a gentle curve in. Also notice I center a little differently than how I've taught you guys on the videos. It's just how I learned, and it's what I'm used to. So with this, I'm going to keep my initial starting form. We normally start pretty narrow. I want to start wider with this pounder form because the bottom's going to be wider. Some of that excess junk. Okay, so I'm starting a little bit wider than I normally would. This is almost the width that I would start for a bowl. Pounder, I'm not going to do much trimming at the bottom, so I can make my bottom a little bit thinner. Again, compress my bottom so I don't have avoid as many cracks as possible. And now I need to throw. When I throw this, I'm going to throw this so that it angles in, kind of a volcano shape. Got the bottom as wide as I want it. And it'll come in a little bit as I pull. Okay. And with this, most of the shaping is going to happen on the outside, with my hand just inside to catch. So really I want to get, because I'm going to make this kind of narrow at the top, I want to get as much of the water and stuff out as possible. Get the inside at the bottom as wide as I need it. Okay, I'm going to collar this in a little bit to start my form. You'll notice too when you collar in that the top gets a little bit thicker. And then I'm going to use my curved rib, because this curve actually is almost perfect for what I want. My inside hand is just catching.